Good afternoon. Well, I am delighted to be here as part of the Global Design Forum programme, and it's a series of talks that are exploring how design is evolving to respond to the urgent needs facing society at large. Speakers have come from all corners of the design community to share new perspectives on how design can become more accessible, sustainable, and at the forefront of change. Today's theme is the healthy city, but here we're going to bring it right down to a personal level to talk about the healthy home. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. Anna Graf is the Sustainability Director at White Architecture in Sweden. Anna was named one of Sweden's 101 most influential people within sustainability. She's been a passionate advocate for sustainable architecture, zero carbon development, and health and well-being for almost 25 years. She's a member of the Swedish government's delegation for circular economy and has managed a wide range of projects in Scandinavia and the UK. Next to her on her right is Uffe Leth, who is the co-founder of the award-winning Danish architecture studio Leth and Gori. Based in Copenhagen, it was founded in 2007 and has a particular focus on innovative housing projects, simplicity and flexibility. Uffe also lectures at the Royal Academy School of Architecture in Copenhagen and has won the prestigious Arne Award from the Danish Architects Association for the best project of the year. Oops. Next to me is Richard Williams, who is the Senior Architectural Development Manager at VELUX. Passionate about architecture, Richard joined the VELUX company over 30 years ago. A Danish company, VELUX is famed for its vision of enabling healthier indoor environments by bringing daylight and fresh air inside. Richard's role allows him to work with architects around the world to fulfill this mission. And finally, at the end, is Nick Newman, is founder of the London-based studio Bark. With experience spanning everything from environmental architecture to climate activism, he's also an author urging architects to radically rethink what it means to be an architect in an era of climate crisis, if not indeed to question what the role of the architect is or can be. Such is your passion for radical action against climate change, I believe you've even been arrested for it. So this makes me feel compelled to start our conversation with Nick, particularly as it's just been recently announced that we've breached the global warming limit of 1.5 degrees across an entire year. And there has, of course, been a litany of extreme weather conditions worldwide. So I have to ask you, have we left it too late?
Do you want me to answer that now? Well, I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't think that there was optimism. But yeah, we need to accelerate. Starting off talking about the healthy home, I will kind of bring it back to the kind of global thoughts. As was mentioned, I'm working with a company called Studio Bark. It's our 10-year anniversary this year. We're based in East London. This is our team. We specialize in environmental architecture, focusing a lot on the practical and skills-based. So we work with universities and various other groups in order to practice things physically, as well as thinking about them in a kind of abstract context. So some of the themes we were asked to talk about, one of them is rethinking the home, or thinking more about how the existing building stock we have can be used. There's a kind of common statistic that 80% of the houses that we're going to have by 2050 are already here. So this is not just about building new houses. This is also thinking about what we're going to do with what we already have. So one of the ways we do that as architects and in our practice is retrofit appraisals. So we will speak with a customer or client about how their existing house can be remodeled, usually at a point where it needs some work anyway. That's the most cost-effective time to do it. You can't necessarily see all of the detail, or maybe you can, but we're looking at some simple kind of building physics, like how to keep the houses warm, looking at the energy balance, so energy going in and heat losses going out, thinking about buildings which are a bit more like a thermos rather than a kind of leaky metal cup. So we propose fabric-first measures, including insulation, decent windows, and also heat recovery systems. So we're thinking about reducing energy first, and then anything that is left over, replacing that with low-energy sources. As a result, with all of those things together, you can get the sum that's greater than its parts. We're also thinking about climate, so not just today's climate, but also the sort of future climates. So this is our water farm project, and in modelling this, we don't just look at the aesthetics, we also do some detailed energy calculations, looking at different kind of heating loads in different spaces. And one of the sort of interesting things is thinking about, so these kind of green sort of graphs you see in the top left. So the London climate, as you see, is on the top left one, and then the Barcelona climate is on the right. And again, by 2050, the estimate is that London's climate is going to be like Barcelona. And we've seen some 40-degree heats, as Michelle's pointing out. So that doesn't seem too far-fetched. So we look at all of these things and how buildings might perform in these various different contexts. Another important thing, the kind of coloured bars at the bottom, is embodied carbon. So we think not just about how the building is using energy, but how much energy the buildings that make it up use, because that's currently not regulated in the UK. You can make something out of whatever you like. Another important thing, so I said once we've got the fabric of the building right, we also look at the technology. So this is a direct electric home that has no fossil fuel. It's called Nest House. It's for a retired couple, so it's designed to be accessible. And we've shown how we can integrate photovoltaic panels to also provide some outside shading and additional sort of protection for the windows in kind of really high heat. So again, in order to do that, we do a lot of modelling of the aspects of the building and the kind of the potential that we have for different technologies to take effect. And we do lots of fun sketches like this, which look at all of the different pieces of technology that you can put into a building, from the ventilation to heat source pumps, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, windows, and of course the fabric itself. And all of those things will be tailored to a specific site and context. I was also asked to thinking about kind of bringing the outside in as one of the themes. So we do this, again, this is our water farm project, through thinking about the building in the landscape, working with landscape consultants, and looking at kind of things like biodiversity net gains, so making sure that the impact of the building is a net positive overall. But I wanted to leave this on a kind of a different note, thinking about kind of outside the home in a different context. And this is by the fact that, if we only think about the buildings and how they are built, then we are kind of missing a lot of the problem here. This is an action by Architects Climate Network. They are a kind of group, a grassroots group of professionals who've decided that they want to push governments and industry in general to try and think a little bit further about, for example, should we be regulating how much energy our buildings use in their construction, the embodied energy, and various other things like this. Because ultimately, while us in kind of richer countries, or those of us who can afford beautifully architecturally designed houses might be able to insulate themselves, there are many people around the world who don't have that luxury. And this is also the subject of an exhibition or an installation which is currently on here at the V&A for London Design Festival, called Barricade and Beacon. And it's looking at how architects and designers have used their skills to create structures for protest movements. So I think that from my side, what's important is thinking not just about how we design our homes, but how as designers we also interface with the kind of the wider discussion around how we sort of radically change. I don't know if I've spoken for too long now, but thank you.
No, not at all. I mean, I think there's going to be so much sort of cross currents between all of your conversations. So some of my questions I'm going to wait until we've heard from all of you. But I did want to just add that on your website, there's a statement that says, together we can force change for a more sustainable and equitable tomorrow. And the reason I introduced you with the idea of the activism as well is that I get a sense that you have an urgency to your conversation. It's no longer a nice to do and that, everyone should consider a heat pump. You've got a bigger picture in mind. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, everything changed around sort of 2018, 2019. Groups like Extinction Rebellion, speakers like Greta Thunberg, both of them saying, like, this isn't just about sustainability. When I was taught, we were talking about sustainability, lowering emissions by, 20% a year. And then we suddenly realized that actually that's not working. It's not doing it quickly enough. And hence why I felt the need to go and glue myself to things. That's not the only approach, and I'm not certainly advocating that others do that, but it certainly brought things home for me that actually the things that we were doing in our practice might not be enough, and hence why it might be necessary to speak kind of on a wider network and write the book.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because I think one of our themes of conversation is, are we just preaching to the converted? Because anyone that comes to any of your practices, they're already there. They already know that they need to be doing something, but how do we get that message out wider? But I'm going to turn it over to Richard, because I love the mission statement of your company, because you could think VELUX, okay, they do windows, but actually it's more than that. And so I allow you to introduce it.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, my name is Richard Williams, and I'm delighted today to share with you a concept where we're challenging housing today called living places. But I think it's really important to set some context within this before I start. We'll be talking about light. We are the indoor generation, and we're looking at an experiment before we go on to the important living places. But first, let there be light. We take for granted, but it's within us every single day, today being a really sort of prime example. And essentially that we feel daylight is the most important ingredient to ourselves and any design we're doing. Daylight changes throughout the day. It's different in the morning than it is in the evening. It affects us all, whether or not you're in the countryside or in a city. Everybody in every day, it affects us. And without daylight, there's no color, and enhances the color, and color stimulates our emotion. How do you feel on a beautiful day like today, walking down the street, as opposed to, conversely, a more sort of gloomy day when it's foggy? It allows life. Without daylight, there is no life, there's no us, and that's why we, within our organization, create well-being for people and planet by transforming spaces using natural daylight and ventilation. And that's where the VE and the Lux come from, the Ventalio, VE Ventalio, and Lux Light, natural daylight and ventilation. I mentioned before we are the indoor generation. What does that mean? We spend an alarming 90% of our time indoors. If you look at it a different way, we only spend 2 hours 40 outside. And yet we get 90% of vitamin D from the sun. We also now, and earlier today, the debate, the indoor air has been shown up to be 5 times more polluted than the outdoor air. And indeed, a 50-year-old would have spent an alarming 45 years inside a building. And the next film highlights what those buildings are like.
In 160 seconds, you will decide how this story ends. This is a story about us, the indoor generation. A generation that spends 90% of its life indoors. It all started the day we left nature behind. We filled our homes with lovely things and all the stuff we wanted. Our homes became places you would never want to leave. Artificial light replaced daylight, and we built our houses so that nothing could escape. We cooked and showered, breathed and played, slept and sweated. But we had closed ourselves in to a point where nothing could get out. So when the air turned bad inside, we tried fixing it with chemicals. And we put in little artificial suns everywhere to make the darkness bearable. That's when things started to happen. Hard to notice in the beginning. Some needed help to sleep, to breathe, to not itch. Many of us even started to feel sad. So we turned on happy lamps to make the sadness go away. Then, scientists discovered that the air inside our homes is up to 5 times more polluted than the air outside. And that the lack of daylight can affect children's learning and increase blood pressure. It turns out that kids' rooms often have the highest concentration of toxicants in the house. In fact, millions of homes are unhealthy to live in. They discovered that living in damp and moldy homes increases the risk of asthma by 40%. And I learned that millions of people like me suffer from asthma and allergies caused by a bad indoor environment. And so, here we are. How the story ends is up to you, because it's not written yet. If you care about the indoor generation, do something. Begin to think and live differently. Let light and fresh air into your life again. Even small changes can make a huge difference for coming generations. Learn how at theindoorgeneration.com.
So very thought-provoking, but some good news here. So within our organization, we do a study from 2015 all the way up to sort of current day where we go around Europe to understand the kind of environments we're living in. Unfortunately and regrettably, some key facts here that asthma is on the increase and poor living environments, which are quite unhealthy, are within that sort of process. And this is what we're learning upon. We've just launched also, not just on healthy homes, but healthy buildings. And we heard earlier today some discussions about hospitals and schools. And you can see 2 key factors there. 42 billion euros could be saved by improving daylight in hospitals, and a further 38 billion on daylighting. Our founder, Willem Rasmussen, said 1 experiment is worth more than 1,000 expert views, and that's exactly what we sort of profess to do within our organization. So Living Places is our newest one, but we've actually done 30 experiments over the last 20 years. And the Living Places, which I'll share with you now, is probably the most passionate we're about from that perspective. Living Places essentially is challenging the way we're building buildings today. It's basically bringing outside in and bringing community spaces together. So really sort of endorsing what Nick was saying earlier and bringing those communities together and using outdoor spaces. So the concept we started and launched this at the UIA International Architects Conference last year in Copenhagen. And you can see on here there's 2 pods where we've basically created two homes, 2 dwellings, and people have gone to live in there. Essentially, there are 5 key elements which we did here. 1, of course, had to be healthy for both the planet and ourselves. It had to be shared. We're living we're living close together yet further apart in today's society. Like any good design, simple is effective. And it has to be adaptive. We all live differently. Is it 2 people living in a home? Is it 6 people living in a home? But more importantly, and I guess the challenge to you guys, the future designers of this world, is that it needs to be scalable. But healthy is the underlying issue from this perspective. So what did we do? If you split this into 2, on the left-hand side, we took what we call a benchmark house. It was a standard house, specifically in Denmark, Copenhagen. And we calculated the embodied carbon within that building, and that gave us a metric of about 11.1, whatever that metric is. With ourselves, Effect Architects, a Danish organization, Artilia, some engineers, we then redesigned that, bringing that down to 3.8. What we're doing in the UK, an alarming 70. So in Denmark, 11.1 is not good enough. We can reduce down to 3.8, and we're building differently here. So what did we do? When you look at this, take away the architecture for one moment, it's mainly the concept and methodology of building here today. So really using the roof space to allow that all-important daylight to penetrate deep into the heart of a building, far better than any facade. It also allows ventilation, the chimney stack effect, allowing that warm air to come into the building and circulate all the way through like a chimney and expel at the sort of top. We use two systems, a timber frame and a close laminated timber within the construction. And then you can see here, very light, very airy, very sort of space, and can be deconstructed as well for longevity. The main purpose here are the materials, and probably looking at the audience today, you look quite a healthy bunch, and it's a bit like if you go down your supermarket aisle, you probably choose some healthy ingredients for when you make your lunch or your dinner. It's the same with construction, whether or not you will choose good materials or poor materials. So the benchmark house, which I referred to earlier, delivered this, an average house of the carbon embodied at about 11. So we then chose a different aisle to go down, and we looked on the timber framed, as you can see here, it came down to 3.8, and not dissimilar on the CLT on 3.9. So essentially, the net result here is really reducing that carbon by sort of 2/3, as you can see here, a huge, huge saving. And when you look at this one example, the fourth column from the left-hand side, the foundation, rather than using a concrete slab foundation, a pile foundation reduces that down significantly by about 92%. So really just to conclude, the scalability is really important. We're all living sort of differently. We can really scale that up when we're looking at sort of different designs and essentially bringing outside in and living totally sort of differently. And that concludes my discussion.
Well, it hardly needs to be said, but that's an incredibly impactful video. I mean, certainly from my perspective, one of my ongoing frustrations is that in the conversation about health and well-being, we talk about exercise, nutrition, and yoga, everything, but the home is so often missed out of that equation, and that's certainly the thing that I've dedicated a lot of my passion and writing towards, because, I mean, the stats speak for themselves, that our homes are more toxic inside than outside, and yet we're not paying it enough attention. I suppose, how do we just get that message across? Because I think I was literally speaking to someone 2 minutes before we started to say, this is my ongoing frustration. We've had all these stats and figures and the data for so long, and yet it doesn't seem to be resonating on a level where it's really, really going to make a difference. So with the public, so with the chemical products, with the building materials, I mean, how many examples do we need to use? Even the cladding that was used on Grenfell is exactly the same insulation panels that you will find at B&Q, that probably every single one of your homes is shrouded in, and yet we are just not. I don't know. Can you help?
Well, hopefully, yes. It's just working, yeah. Hopefully, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is down to mindset, and we have to be careful on language we use now. But if you look at house building today, if you look at our colleagues in Sweden and Denmark, the mindset is totally, totally different. And if you think of it, our industry, the construction industry, accounts for 38% of carbon, of which 28% is down to heating and cooling a building. And so we have to think differently. So when you look at the architecture, that's one aspect. But I think take the Scandi-esque look away from it and actually adapt the methodology of the way we're constructing. So as an example, you probably speak more of this being in Sweden, but they use sort of timber frame, and over here we don't use as much. However, the good news is in Scotland, there's a lot of timber framed buildings that are being used. So I think a lot of it is mindset. I think the audiences, the fellow architects who are taking up this challenge are really engaged, as you can see from Nick earlier. I think the challenge is with the key house builders. But without sounding too arrogant, it can be done because we've done it, and it's been extrapolated into the Netherlands and about 5 or 6 other countries. And so it's just having a leap of faith. And so hopefully with the future architects here, you'll take on that baton.
Well, I hope so, because I just was also remembering that I think there was a report came out yesterday that the UK has now been named the sick man of Europe. And the genius conclusion, and I say this with some sarcasm, of the report was that we really need to move from a healthcare policy that's based around sickness to one that's around health creation. I mean, it's so blindingly obvious, and yet we need a report in 2024 to tell us that. But on that note, I'm going to hand over to Anna, because I know that that's very much a sort of a beating heart in your practice, which was founded in 1951 with the aim to improve society through architecture. And I think the statement on your website is the vision of your practice is that by 2030, all of your architecture will be regenerative and climate neutral through design excellence.
Okay, thank you for inviting me here, and I will continue what both Nick and Richard has already spoken a bit about, but I will focus on the health, even if climate is, of course, very, very important. And if you would just start with a home. What is a home? Well, first of all, it is a shelter where you want to feel secure and safe, and where you have the sense of belonging, a place where you live. And then when you go inside the building, there are all those aspects already mentioned about daylight, especially air quality, temperature, and so on, that makes you feel good and creates a good indoor environment. And I would say that in Sweden we have had actually energy regulations since the 70s, where to ensure good insulation and good windows. And already in 1991 we actually introduced compulsory ventilation control to ensure good indoor air quality. And that was a consequence out of the 1980s problem with sick building syndromes, which I imagine that you've also spoken about here in UK. But if we go a bit other aspects that are also shown to be very important for maybe more your well-being and the experience of a building or a home. Well, daylight was already mentioned, but also the being close to nature or have outlooks for nature, or even the colors indoors or the volumes of the rooms. That has also very health or important impact on your well-being. And there are studies, a lot of studies concerning this, and we have also studied especially in healthcare and psychiatric clinics. And then it has been shown that if you consider these aspects, you can shorten the time you need to have care in a hospital, or even reduce the need for medication in psychiatric care. So it's very, very important aspects. And it was also mentioned construction in timber, and in Sweden that is increasing a lot. But that also has not only a low carbon construction materials, but it's also creating a good indoor environment, but it also affects your blood pressure actually. If you have exposed wood, in studies it has shown that the blood pressure is lowered, and it also decreases stress. So that's also quite interesting. But then you spoke about that we spend so much time indoors. So the outdoors, around the surroundings, around your home is of course also very important. So we go out. And a study we did at White last year, when we asked, well, there were a lot of questions concerning the sustainable city, but one of the questions was, what do you actually want to have close to your home? And then 65% of the residents, they answered that they wanted to live close to nature or green areas. And that's also, of course, because it's good for your health. And also how you create the surroundings from a social aspect. We know that obesity is a problem today, and we need especially children. They spend too little time outdoors. So we need to encourage people to move around, but also social aspects, that it's a place, there are places for all, nevertheless, age or gender or so on. And then Nick mentioned that we need also to preserve buildings much more and transform existing buildings. We can't just tear down buildings and build new. And this is an example from a factory that we transformed to apartments. But we need also to consider that there could be other aspects. It needs to be balanced with the health aspects, because then we need to consider daylight. Maybe the existing buildings can't ensure that, or also existing materials that has a negative impact on your health with chemicals or hazardous substances. But to wrap up this, I would say that we can definitely, if we just create homes or plan homes out of people's needs and also health, we can not only create good indoor environments, but also ensure and strengthen the social well-being, and also create areas which can tackle the effects of climate change and strengthen biodiversity, and also, of course, create attractive neighborhoods where people want to move around. And this is an example also from a project we've done in Sweden. So thank you.
Do we know why wood lowers the blood pressure?
No, I don't know, but I suppose it is this feeling of natural. Being close to nature, and that is a natural element, but that's just a guess. I can't confirm that. Anyone else? No.
It's just such a brilliant thing. If we know that as a fact, then you kind of think immediately, why have we not got more wood inside all of our homes? Because we know that hypertension and heart disease is absolutely on the increase, and it's like, duh, have we missed something here? But that's extraordinary. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about the biophilic design, so I imagine
it's a part of it.
Yeah, it's part of that. Okay. One thing I can't help but thinking, watching these presentations, is that we're showing a lot of new builds, and in my head I keep hearing the stat that you expressed, that I've heard as well, that actually by 2050, all our homes, they're already here. So it is all about retrofitting, and we simply do not have enough people trained to do that. So, and I know you've both mentioned this, but I think we need to pick up on it here, because also a lot of the people that I speak to, they have their home and they just want to know how to fix it and how to make it better. As much as we love thinking, oh, I'd love to move to Scandinavia and have green space on my outdoors, but it's just not pragmatically possible for many people. So what do they do?
It's a valid point. The retrofit program is huge and indeed growing. An alarming 38% of our housing stock, or 9.5 million homes, were built prior to World War II. And as you rightly say, that a lot of retrofit program is there. We did a couple of examples, one in Slovakia and the other in Belgium. We took some existing housing stock, about 1930s home, and we thought, well, what should we do with that? And so we took the envelope of that building and did some obvious things like insulation. We then did an extension, which is becoming ever more popular now, by extending out, because I think in a previous session, we're all living and working differently now. We're working from home significantly more, so we need the home office. If you think of it, many people throughout COVID and pandemic were living in their bedrooms 24 hours a day. There's 8 hours you sleep, 8 hours you're working, and if you're working in the bedroom where you're sleeping, that's not particularly good. So I think having a look at the landscape of your house and working and living differently, very open space. And so the examples we've done, again, loft conversions, extensions, and letting that all natural daylight and ventilation come into our home, allowing it to breathe as opposed to closing it in, I think is a fundamental point of the retrofit program.
Anna, do you want to jump in?
Well, I would say that in Sweden, it's not that, to tear down residential buildings or homes is actually what you do. You don't really do that. Well, you do, but that's very rare, I would say, because that's actually an area where people have grown up, and it's like tearing down their lives. So there's a lot of retrofitting in Sweden, and the most important is to consider the energy performance and also daylight, and you can do that. I wouldn't say that you need to do some kind of retrofitting or refurbishment, of course, but then also another aspect is those materials with the chemicals. But I think there is, you asked why we don't do that. I would say we do that, but I think we need to maybe consider a higher focus on architecture as well, because it's usually made out of a technical perspective. And now we also need to consider the the environmental or climate impact, but also what kind of architecture do we actually create when we refurbish. So.
No, I agree. I mean, I trained as an architect, and one of the principles that we understood was you go from the city to the detail. But I think the sphere that I'm working at the moment is very much about the detail of real people living in homes that they can't afford to move out of, so what do they do? And again, I immediately think in the UK, I think we have the highest use of fire retardant globally. So all our upholstery fabrics are coated in this stuff. And so are we asking people to get rid of their sofas and their curtains? But you can't buy them in this country unless they are coated in these materials. So I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty, but actually the nitty-gritty on the day-to-day level is what people are actually contending with. Nick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about how things are incentivized. I mean, just going back to the idea, I mean, the way that we often speak to our clients, and that people come to us and say they want to extend a house, but, you know, and the reason is because, let's say in London, you might be able to sell a square metre of additional space for about £10,000, and it might cost you £3,000 to do it. So everyone is being conditioned through, you know, property shows and stuff, extend. Whereas we say that, you know, actually, if you're really serious about making a healthy house, it might be better to spend the money that you're going to spend on a fancy kitchen or an extension on reusing the space that you already have and putting the money in the materials. So a personal experience, my family have just moved house, and they have they've done a deep energy retrofit of their house, so they've insulated it, they've put a heat pump in, new windows, and their energy costs have gone down loads. There's no mold, it's nice and warm. My sort of, you know, now retired parents are going to be well insulated. However, if they were to put this on the market, they probably wouldn't get their money back at the moment, and that's because it's not incentivized. So I think, you know, things like council tax banding, readjustments, or re-educating people about, you know, the energy costs and somehow building that into the value of a house, that's how we will see change, is through incentives.
When you say incentivized, do you mean, explain that a bit more to me. So who needs to be incentivized? That society at large needs to realize that actually a healthy home is a better home than a bigger home?
What I'm saying is that at the moment, by incentives, I mean by the market is saying, you know, if your house is bigger, you can sell it for more. So that's an incentive. Whereas, for example, to put insulation on your house might cost you £10,000 or £20,000, but an estate agent or surveyor wouldn't necessarily value that. They might say, here's your EPC, but people don't necessarily equate that to, that's going to save me money in the future, and therefore I can get a bigger mortgage, say. So, you know, there are people who are starting to talk about that, but it's quite niche. Like I think the Ecology Building Society will give you a bigger mortgage if you have a low energy home, for example. But I'm saying we basically need to get the money flows to work alongside the building physics.
I think we all need to change our mindset. I mean, if you are refurbishing your home, you can't just think that you should throw out your kitchen and then put in a new or remending everything within your apartment or whatever. And that is, I would say, that is a shift at the moment in Sweden, and especially when it's about offices. So I think it will also turn into residential, but that's also a question of costs. I mean, if you keep, for instance, a kitchen and you refurbish it, then you save money. And you said that because you also notice now that also, once again, offices, that will actually become more popular to move into existing buildings that are refurbished and that is also more attractive from an investor perspective. And I hope that will also be shown for residential buildings pretty soon. But I think all of us need to change our minds. New is not the old, is the new.
We'll definitely come back to that, but can I hand over now to Uffe?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I think the title of my short presentation fits quite well into this discussion, because building upon what already exists is kind of a summary of the work that we have done in Leth and Gori for the past 17 years in our practice. And I've tried to bring today a couple of examples and themes from our work. It's very much centered around this idea of the healthy home or the healthy building. We do other projects than housing. But maybe the presentation is also a little bit about this urgent shift and an attempt to also have a healthy planet in the future. The idea of existing buildings and making transformation projects has been part of our work from the beginning. I guess these are resources, important resources, and also sometimes cultural heritage that we need to look after. But often the problem is that there's a shift in program and it doesn't always fit with the building. So I'm going to show two quick examples of transformation projects where we've extended the area. This a villa from the 60s in a very beautiful natural setting where we couldn't increase the footprint of the building. So instead we built a new roof and increased the footprint upwards in these spaces and rooms and skylights, completely transforming the building and adding this very little extra area that the client needed not to demolish the building to build a new one. And of course, at the same time, adding space and light and contact to the outside, to this house. Another example, this is maybe more cultural heritage, a former chapel building that we transformed into an activity center for people affected by cancer. In this project, we extended the building from within, building a new wooden structure inside the chapel space, dividing it into 2 floors. This is from the built project. So we have this activity space, training hall downstairs, a workshop space, and upstairs, upstairs, another space which can be used for lectures, yoga and stuff like that. Also, cultural heritage, our built heritage can inspire new projects. This is an example of a very typical Danish family house, but a new building with quite a radical program. We were commissioned to build a house with a minimum lifespan of 150 years. And the normal building code is 50 years, so it was tripling that. And we did that by making a very simple house with a large roof, a brick house, a homogeneous wall made out of brick and air. This is from the building side, and this is the built house. So a very simple house with natural materials, a breathable brick outer wall, timber roof, etc. I'm going to flick through this one because I think we will run out of time if I don't. But this is another project that we're building in Copenhagen at the moment under the same theme. Downsizing, I think, is an important theme as well. Trying to reduce our housing footprint. This is an example of a villa, mini villa, only 90 square meters for a family of 4 that we built in Copenhagen. So very tiny spaces, but still a lot of ceiling height and a lot of light and everything that you need from a house. It's only smaller. Another example, which is an institution we built for the municipality of Copenhagen, so it's supporting housing, where we built small 30 square meter row houses. There's a VELUX window there.
I saw it straight away. You didn't have to tell me.
the smallest one you can get, but really adds something to this tiny space. So again, very simple building volume, very simple flats, but giving a lot of quality to these inhabitants. And then trying to get back to nature, I think, is an important theme. In this project, we worked with researchers and craftsmen and material producers to make a building system where we use reeds combined with bricks to attempt to build urban housing, multi-story housing using biomaterials. And we were allowed to make this prototype, a pavilion that we built in Copenhagen last year. Hopefully we'll get a chance to explore that a bit more. But there's a lot to gain there. And I think this is a very important tradition for all of us. And then the last theme, community, is a little bit what we're doing now. Having a dialogue, talking together, learning from each other's experience. In our studio, we've engaged in having an exhibition space during events and talks for the last 13 years. First in this storefront in Copenhagen, and now we inhabit this old warehouse where we have a small community with other architects, and we run an exhibition space with exhibitions from colleagues, artists, etc. So if you're in Copenhagen, you're always welcome to pop by. Thanks.
I have one quick question. With the tiny 90 square meter house that you mentioned, did the client come to you and say, I want a tiny house, or did you have to convince them that they just didn't need a big house?
They came to us with this urgent need to reduce their footprint in a way, to downscale really their life. And this is in a Copenhagen setting, so building a house there is extremely expensive. And they were not rich, but they found this tiny plot where they could build a maximum of 90 square meters. So that's what we did. And they were a family of 3, and then they became a family of 4, and they still live there and really enjoy it. So it was successful in that way. But you need kind of the mindset. Because a normal house, new house in Denmark is 200 square meters, so it's more than double this.
Well, yeah, that's why it stood out to me, which is what I want to circle back to. And I mean, this is the question I'm going to put to all of you, is how do we get that change in mindset then? How do we get people engaged? How do we get people understanding that it's about the environment that you're living within, that we are expecting our bodies to thrive within, and that if we don't make change, I feel it's really getting urgent. We've talked a lot about climate, which I think the messaging on that is very confused. I think people just don't feel it's real. We talk about carbon. I think that goes straight over most people's heads. So I'm really searching for, like, what are the words, what is the messaging that we can use to help people understand, and then maybe we can force through the legal, can't say that word, then we can force through perhaps the legal change that will make these things mandatory, because I know, Nick, you talked about regulation. So how do we do this?
Oh, if you're asking me. I mean, I really like the idea that, for example, if you could have, I think there already are these shows about, like amazing sort of tiny spaces. If you can inspire people for how they can live in a really sort of beautifully designed way, and let's say that you're currently living in a, big 4-bedroom house, that perhaps you don't need. Maybe some people do, but maybe you don't. You've got some spare space. If you could sell that house, buy a smaller house, and use the money to make it like really good, and minimize it, and celebrate people like, I know this is completely left field, but like Marie Kondo. If you look at the things that...
I have issue with Marie Kondo, but carry on.
Okay. basically for me, let's say wardrobe, like minimizing things and making everything in your shelf look really, really nice, for example. I don't know about the bigger issues, but yeah, like small and beautiful, I think that can be promoted really easily, and putting the money on things which are going to make everyone feel happier, healthier, rather than trying to stretch ourselves by that bigger thing that we can't afford and that we can't afford as a society.
I think it's a good point you make, because I think it's down to cost versus value. And I think you mentioned it, Uffe, before, that what's quite interesting, in the UK, we're the only country in the whole of Europe, well, not in Europe, but in the whole of Europe, who sell houses per, is it a 2-bedroom house, 3-bedroom house, or 4-bedroom house? And yet we build per foot squared or meter squared. In the commercial language we use when we're doing office spaces, we sell per meter squared or foot squared, but we all don't know what we're living in. And I think that's the thing. If you use the right materials and challenge the way we're living, and I think, in answer to your question, amazing forums like this, I think the audience today, to amplify what we're discussing is a really good thing. To have, write-ups, TV programs, engaging with architects and just expressing what other manufacturers are doing as well is really good. But I think that the biggest thing is the challenge we have, and I have to be careful on the language I use, like I said, is challenging the house builders today, because I don't think we get a good enough choice. Architects can provide amazing designs, but it's how we, I guess, scale that into what we all want to live and breathe, really.
Uffe, do you have an answer to how do we get people more engaged on the very grassroots level of this?
Well, I think the engagement is there, as Nick also said. I think it's about providing good solutions and showing that we can actually achieve much more with less. I think it's about quality, but I also agree with Nick. There's something about the market. We should do something about this market, which is driven to build poor quality and sell it for the highest possible price. We need to find ways of transforming the building industry where everything is not just about money. I think that's really important. And another thing, I think we need, it's a really important mental change for all of us, but we need to agree with the fact that we get old and we die, and time is actually okay. So everything doesn't have to be new and fresh all the time. New is not good. I mean, we need timeliness, and we don't need to change our kitchen every 10 years. We just need to live with the scratches and these marks of time. I think it's really important, because we spend so much resources all the time trying to keep everything new, and it's a mission impossible.
Anna?
Well, I can only agree. Well, it depends also, to create new trends, so to say, to live in, if you talk about single family houses, but if you talk about apartments, I think you can also work more with the shared spaces. You maybe don't need to have everything within your apartment. There are good examples of that. And especially, I totally agree that we need to create an architecture as well that is the new architecture with what is already there, that isn't new from the beginning. I think that is also good, or a responsibility, actually.
Can I just say, I thought you summarised it really well with old is the new, which I thought was quite funny.
Well, sadly, we've run out of time. I think it's hard to conclude beyond to say this is a huge subject that I think we've just started to touch from 4 different perspectives. It's so brilliant. I want to watch your video over and over again and get that out there, because I've never seen anything quite so impactful as that. I think it's extraordinary, and maybe that can really engender a lot of conversation. So it just remains for me to say, Nick, thank you so much, Uffe, Anna, and Richard, and let's carry on the conversation. Thank you.